What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So something I noticed recently that really surprised me, some of my most popular videos on the channel, month after month, are the ones that are all about the LG Stylo 6, which is kind of weird for a few reasons. The LG Stylo 6 is more than a year old now, and with today's tech, that's not ancient. I think for a flagship phone, there'd still be a ton of attention on it even after a year, but it's sort of uncommon for a budget or mid-range phone like this, and especially one from a less popular brand, to retain that kind of popularity and interest for so long. Furthermore, speaking of the brand, LG doesn't even make smartphones anymore. Seriously, their smartphone hardware department, their entire mobile phone business just was shut down back in April. So they aren't making any new phones, but that doesn't mean you can't still buy an LG phone from certain places. And actually, you can get this Stylo 6 from a lot of places still. Amazon has renewed and new Stylo 6 listings. All the prepaid carriers in the US seem to still sell this phone. Target and Walmart even have them in stock. Now, there's no law that says they can't sell stuff from a brand or corporate division that doesn't exist anymore. And I guess I don't really expect the salesperson to let people know, hey, LG isn't in the smartphone business anymore, by the way, but I feel like that's still kind of an important thing to know. But regardless of all that, people are still buying this year-old phone from a defunct manufacturer. And in this video, I'm gonna try and explain why I think that's the case and whether or not you should join the crowd and do the same thing if that's something you're considering. And by the way, if you have a Stylo 6, if you've been rocking one for a while, or maybe you just got one too, I'd love to know your experience with the phone as well in the comments below. Let me know what you think of it. Now, on the surface, I always thought the Stylo 6 had a lot going for it. It maybe isn't the most attractive phone in the world at first glance, at least not from the front, but it has all the important bits that I think the average smartphone user would want. First off, it's massive. It's still one of the largest phones I've personally used in both screen size at 6.8 inches and just sheer overall phone size. The display is obviously framed by thick borders, a huge teardrop notch, big bottom chin, and in the hand, the squared off, flat, boxy design with all that excess everything essentially makes this phone feel like a brick. But I do think its size is something that attracts people to it. Watching a YouTube video on this thing is like watching it on a TV. It's great for content consumption, it's great for reading, and the screen itself is 1080 resolution. So there's not a lot to complain about, aside from just the fact that it looks dated, and it wasn't even a great design early last year when it first came out. Around back though, it kind of looks good. It sort of mimics glass, the finish is very unique, the frame is polished with like a metal-like material, and most importantly, it's not missing anything either. The fingerprint sensor around back is a fan favorite, of course. It's nice to still have that. There's an SD card slot, which you'll definitely need. The headphone jack is there too, and of course, the stylus, the whole point of this phone's existence, which I'll talk about in a second. All in all, the Stylo 6 is kind of that complete package of random hardware features and add-ons that tend to get taken away from similar phones nowadays, so I suppose that's reason number one why people still gravitate towards it. The other big reason, obviously, is the stylus. This cheap little metal pointer paired up with a handful of basic drawing apps that give the phone its name and is probably the main feature that draws people to it. Now, to be completely honest, there's nothing that special about the stylus setup or any of the software add-ons that come with it. In fact, it's as basic can be. The stylus itself isn't smart or otherwise connected to the phone in any way. It's a metal and rubber stick that acts like your finger if you want to just interact with the phone. And to be honest, I know a lot of people just like doing this. But there's also those stylo-specific apps and add-ons that do enhance the stylus experience to some extent. You can write out notes, draw a picture, you can color, you can just pass the time. There are a few other random add-ons too. They're all features and experiences you can't really get from most other phones. The downside is that because the stylus and display too, for that matter, aren't exactly made for each other, you get this really rudimentary pen and screen experience with some lag and a big gap between the pen tip and the line you're drawing. You get used to that though, I guess, and in general, the phone lives up to its name. It's a stylus phone with a built-in stylus and stylus software features, and an experience, like I said, that just isn't really available elsewhere. So as a phone, not only does the Stylo 6 pack all the basics and then some, but it also adds that whole extra stylus element on top of it. It's obviously great for being a massive content consumption device too, and that's a solid foundation, but there's two more things to consider. We can't ignore the fact that with LG completely shutting down their smartphone operations, there's a big question mark with regards to support, both with the hardware and the software. Now, depending on where you buy this phone from, if you need to return it or exchange it, that's pretty much on the retailer to deal with at this point. Those retailers don't really have LG to fall back on anymore to help them out. So it's one of the risks of still selling this phone, I think, for them, but less of a risk to the consumer in a way. That's all fine, but there's also the software side of things, the Android updates, the security updates, app compatibility with LG's stuff, and carrier updates too. You might have seen that my Stylo 6 is a very T-Mobile branded device. Now, on the one hand, shockingly, this phone has received a couple security updates since LG's mobile division shut down, and in their press release earlier in the year, they pledged to offer support and updates for an undetermined period of time. Unfortunately, that language isn't very helpful, and while it's great that the phone is at least updated through this first half of the year, I suspect that sooner rather than later, all LG smartphones will stop receiving any kind of updates, and that's particularly disappointing for this phone, since like I said, it's only a year old. If you don't care one way or another about Android 11 or monthly security updates, I guess it doesn't matter either way, you can skip past this part. But the gist of it is, the longer this phone goes without getting new updates, the slower it'll feel, the more vulnerable it'll become, and it'll also become more outdated more quickly, which is kind of a bummer, again, for a one-year-old device. It also just means that this phone is no longer a good long-term investment either. Most phones nowadays will at least get 2, 3, maybe even 4 years of updates, and that makes shelling out hundreds of bucks for a phone sort of worth it. With the Stylo 6, I'd be surprised if this thing sees 2 more security updates total, if that, and I would be blown away if it somehow received Android 11. With all this, I think you kind of have to weigh what's important to you. It's not the end of the world for a phone to no longer be supported. It's not like it's going to suddenly stop working overnight. It's going to be fine. And in fact, LG seems somewhat willing to keep it updated for a little bit longer, which might be a reason to consider it even. But at the same time, what could have been a decent device with potentially a couple years lifespan suddenly has a very real death date approaching very rapidly. Finally, there's also the matter of the price. The Stylo 6 unlocked is like a $230 phone right now, which, considering all the pros and the cons and countless other devices you could get instead of this one, that makes it a really bad deal actually. But you can also take the prepaid route and get the Stylo 6 for under $150 on contract from like Cricket Wireless. The big kicker though is, if you're a new customer, half these prepaid companies will literally give you the Stylo 6 for free if you sign a new contract. And free is a really good price for this phone. I think for the average consumer, getting shown this big beefy phone with a huge display and shiny back cover, and being told it has a stylus too, that's all enticing enough to fork over a few bucks a month for a data plan in order to get one. And that's likely why so many people are still buying this phone right now, with some of those other reasons I mentioned as considerations too. The bottom line is that while there are plenty of reasons not to buy the Stylo 6 anymore, I think, there's still plenty of reasons to actually consider it. And I don't blame anyone for getting one now, or even getting one a couple months from now, potentially. The only other alternatives, if you want a stylus-specific phone, are the Moto G stylus, which is twice the price, the S21 Ultra, which is in a completely different league, or a Samsung Note device, which is also a year old now and is also in a completely different price range. I think the most disappointing thing about the Stylo 6 really is just the fact that we aren't getting a new one anymore. This unique device, the only affordable stylus phone out there, it's approaching its end, and I can totally understand why people are still so interested in it, but I mostly just want to see a really nice alternative come out from a company sometime soon for this phone. There's obviously an audience for it. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on the LG Stylo 6 right now. What do you guys think about this phone? Is it something you're considering? Do you have one? Have you been using it for a while? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.